So just quickly, I want to go through pressure testing. This is like a huge buzzword right now. Everybody's talking about pressure testing. Have you pressure tested it? Is it pressure tested? Do you pressure test? Look, frankly, most of you don't know how to pressure test properly. I can't be more direct and blunt, but I want to keep this short, and the only way to do that is to be direct. If you are in a technical learning environment where you're just training something for the first time, you should not be pressure testing it. Skill development takes time. Skill development takes refining and figuring out where the weak points are in a methodology before you throw it out, before you decide, this doesn't work. And that's the unfortunate side of martial arts, right? Because I can do something based on possibility and I can do something based on probability. And the reality is it could work no matter which one. And the issue is it going to work regularly? Is it going to work often? Is it going to work against the majority of people you run into? Is it going to work in the majority of situations? And so we have to kind of look at things a little bit differently just beyond pressure testing. Pressure testing is a good thing to learn and you need to do it, but it needs to be progressive. You need to first develop the skills you need to freaking apply the technique. You don't, generally speaking, you would not have a line cook suddenly run as a head chef or manager, a kitchen manager. Like, this just wouldn't happen. And essentially that's what you're doing. If you're in a situation where you're just learning a technique, you're just putting that thing into practice, you're basically just getting the fundamental skills sorted out, your timing is bad, everything is not right yet about it, and then you start adding pressure to it, yeah, it's not going to work. It's a pretty consistent zero return on that. Does that mean that the technique doesn't work? Not necessarily. The reality is that some things work for me that don't work for other people. There are things that work for other people that don't work for me. It could be that the majority of things work for other people that don't work for me. This doesn't mean that they're invalid. It just means that they don't work for me. You know, we all have physical attributes. We all have personal attributes, emotional attributes, psychological, you know, all that stuff, let alone what we actually train as attributes. You know, are we interested in weight training and cardio and all that stuff? Because those are all things that play a factor sometimes in how things work out. And unless you're progressively training, unless you're progressively increasing pressure on something, there's no way to know if it works or doesn't work. Unfortunately, the majority of us in martial arts don't spend the time to properly pressure test at all. We go from, you know, if you look at my last vlog, we move from, generally speaking, we move from prepared fighting, prepared combat. We work, you know, with people in class, and we work knowing what the situation is, and we work generally kind of having some sense that something's going to happen, and we know is generally what it is, or even very specifically in most cases. And that's kind of that's different than pressure, right? Because pressure doesn't always give you a heads up. And so pressure testing is one of those deals where you really have to understand what you're trying to accomplish with something. You can't just, oh, okay, well, Joe Schmo is going to add pressure to my technique to see if it fails. Well, first off, Joe knows what the hell you're going to do. So if you think that Joe just adding pressure to it makes your technique better, it might, it could. But it doesn't always mean that, because sometimes surprise is a really big factor in martial arts. You can be well trained, and when it comes to, as I mentioned in my last blog, you can be completely well trained, be one of the best people at applying, but you get surprised by an ambush and you have no sense of how to recover, or no sense of how to move beyond that, then you're screwed. You know, you resort to caveman shit again. So it's the same with pressure testing, right? Somebody pressure tests you and you know they're pressure testing you. It's still different than when somebody resists you in a way that you're unfamiliar with, or resists you in a way when they move differently than you're used to. So these are all considerations when we talk about pressure testing that I just don't think people even grasp. You know, it isn't always just strength either. You know, sometimes you don't need strength to resist. Sometimes, I mean, my daughters, seriously, my daughter's like, I've had 3 girls, and they're all different ages, and sometimes you're like, okay, I want to apply this joint lock to them, and they just slip out of it because they basically have no musculature, and so their arm is half the size of a guy's arm, and they're just relaxed and they're fluid, and they just let it and you're like, what the frick? Why does that suck? But I have to remember the context, right? The context is important in this case. And the same is true of pressure testing. Pressure testing doesn't suddenly mean your technique is infallible. You know, you have to still understand that. To me, the ultimate pressure testing is when your technique fails, and you understand to move to something else. You immediately adapt to that situation, and you respond appropriately. And appropriate doesn't mean because somebody else said it so. It means because in the relationship you're at with your attacker, that you're doing the right thing at the right time in that moment. And pressure testing can't really be replicated. You can't really do it. You can only approach it. You know, there are things you can do to sort of amp it up and come close. But again, you know, true pressure testing is the difference between prepared and unprepared fighting, which I mentioned in the last vlog. So, you know, if you're only dealing with standardized stuff, or you're only dealing with, you know, face-to-face type of pressure, you're still not really doing pressure testing. You're doing something. You're doing a portion of what could be considered pressure testing, but you're not doing complete pressure testing. And that's okay. You just need to know where you're at. Another component here is, you know, when you're studying something, how do you know, is it good or is it bad? Unfortunately, the only way that I really know to do that is by experience, because if you're still in the skill development stage in the learning phase, there is no way to truly know until after you're done. So it's possible that you just may be chasing a rainbow.